Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root, the lonely 70-year-old rancher told the. Henry McAllister lived alone on a vast ranch that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. At 70 years old, he had seen more seasons than he could count, more storms than anyone would wish for, and more dry summers than the land itself could remember. The ranch, inherited from his father and grandfather, was both his home and his lifelong companion. Its wooden fences were weathered and worn, yet Henry took pride in repairing them himself, hammering each nail with steady hands even as his back ached. He had long since learned that no one would do it for him, and he liked it that way. Each morning, Henry woke before the sun. He would sit on the old wooden porch of his ranch house with a steaming cup of coffee, the cold morning air brushing against his face. The sky was often painted in shades of orange and purple, a quiet reminder of the world that moved outside his small, private life. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, and the cattle stirred slowly in their pens. These simple sounds, often unnoticed by the townsfolk who lived in busy streets, were the rhythm of Henry's life. He did not feel lonely in the silence, he felt at peace. But beneath that peace was a quiet longing, a dream that had never left him, even after all these years. Henry had always been different from the others in town. While his neighbors spent weekends in noisy gatherings or traveled to faraway places for fun, Henry spent his days observing the land, tending to his animals and thinking. To outsiders, he might have seemed stubborn or even strange. He spoke little, often nodding politely when people passed by, but keeping the majority of his thoughts to himself. Children whispered about the old man with the hard eyes, who never smiled much, and adults often shook their heads at his solitary ways. But Henry did not care. He had a purpose, and he knew the world would understand it eventually, or maybe it wouldn't. That did not matter. The ranch was both a blessing and a challenge. The land was wide and fertile in some places, dry and unforgiving in others. It required constant attention. Henry's days were filled with chores that never seemed to end. Mending fences, checking water supplies, feeding animals, repairing barns, and tending to small patches of crops that he had planted over the years. Each task required strength, patience, and attention to detail. At 70, every movement was a reminder of his age, yet Henry refused to slow down. "If I stop," he often muttered to himself, "then nothing will grow at all." It was not just the work that drove him, it was a dream he had carried for decades. Henry wanted to leave a mark on the world, something that would outlast him. It was not about fame or wealth, it was about life, growth, and hope. He often spoke quietly to himself while working, words that seemed strange but powerful. "Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." Those words were more than a mantra, they were a promise. The seed was not just a plant or a tree, but a symbol of everything he wanted to leave behind. A living, breathing reminder that life could flourish even in harsh conditions. People in town rarely understood this. Some thought he was foolish for dreaming at his age, believing that a 70-year-old man had no reason to continue such laborious work. Others envied his independence, secretly wishing they had the courage to pursue something meaningful for themselves. But Henry never worried about what others thought. He had learned early in life that only action mattered. Words and opinions were fleeting, effort and perseverance left lasting marks. The ranch had many corners, each with its own story. The old barn, standing slightly crooked after decades of storms, held memories of calves born in winter nights and storms that rattled the roof. The orchard, though small, carried trees planted by his father that had survived decades of harsh seasons. Henry walked through these spaces often, touching the bark of trees or smoothing the soil with his hands, whispering encouragement to the plants as if they were old friends. To an outsider, it might have looked like talking to inanimate objects, but Henry believed that every living thing responded to care and attention. Evenings were the hardest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry would sit alone in his small living room, listening to the creaking of the house and the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night. He sometimes felt the weight of loneliness pressing against him, a subtle ache in his chest that no amount of work could cure. But he never let it stop him. Instead, he would open a journal and write down observations, plans, and dreams. He wrote about the land, the animals, and the tiny sprouts that were slowly growing. Every word was a reminder that his efforts mattered, even if no one else could see them. Henry's days were also punctuated by small moments of wonder. A hawk gliding across the sky, a fawn cautiously stepping through the grass, or the first blossom of a tree that had taken years to bear fruit. These moments were treasures. He would pause, take a deep breath, and feel the satisfaction of being part of something larger than himself. These fleeting glimpses of life reminded him why he continued, why he refused to stop, and why his dream mattered. Despite his solitude, Henry was not without compassion. He had helped lost travelers find their way, fed stray animals, and once saved a neighbor's cow from drowning in a muddy river. These acts were not done for recognition. They were simply part of who he was. Over the years, a few young people had visited the ranch, curious about the old man and his stubborn ways. They often left inspired, carrying pieces of Henry's wisdom back into the world. Henry's secret, though, was his unshakable belief in the future. He often said that the land could forgive neglect, that seeds could sprout even after years of being buried under dust and hardship. He did not fear failure because he knew every attempt, every effort was a step toward growth. His stubbornness was not mere pride, it was faith. Faith in life, in the land, and in the power of persistence. On nights when the wind howled through the trees and the house shivered under the weight of storms, Henry would sit by the fireplace, warming his hands and heart. He would look at the small seedlings in the greenhouse, fragile yet defiant, and whisper to them, "Spread wider, grow strong. Take root." Those words were more than instructions. They were a promise to himself, a vow that his life's work would not end quietly, that it would echo in every leaf, every branch, and every living thing that grew because of his care. In the end, Henry McAllister's life was a testament to quiet determination. He did not need applause, recognition, or fame. He needed only the land, the animals, and the unwavering belief that even one person's effort could make a difference. His 70 years had taught him patience, resilience, and the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. And as the first stars appeared in the night sky above the ranch, Henry knew, deep in his heart, that the seed he planted, literal and metaphorical, would one day flourish, spreading wider than he had ever imagined. Henry McAllister had always believed that life, much like the land he tended, required patience, persistence, and vision. While most people his age were content to slow down, Henry's days were filled with careful planning and quiet labor. His dream had grown larger over the years, becoming more vivid with each passing season. He wanted more than just a ranch that survived. He wanted a sanctuary, a place where life could flourish no matter the odds. He wanted his seed, the one he had spoken about for decades, to take root and spread wider than even he could imagine. The mornings on the ranch began early, as they always had. Henry would rise before the sun, stretching his stiff muscles and letting the cold air wake him fully. He would walk through the barns, greeting his animals as if they were old friends. The cows would look at him with calm eyes, the horses would stamp their hooves in playful impatience, and the chickens would cluck, pecking at the fresh grain he scattered. These small rituals grounded Henry and reminded him of the importance of consistency. He knew that even the smallest neglect could lead to loss, and loss, at his age, was harder to recover from. Over the years, Henry had studied the land with the careful attention of a scientist and the patience of a gardener. He knew the soil's moods, the way the wind shifted across the open plains, and the subtle patterns of rainfall. Some areas of the ranch were fertile, while others resisted growth stubbornly. He had learned not to force the land, but to listen to it. He would spend hours digging small test holes, examining the soil and speaking quietly to it, whispering encouragements as though the earth itself could hear him. To outsiders, this might have seemed strange, perhaps even obsessive, but Henry believed every living thing responded to care, whether it was a plant, an animal, or the soil itself. Henry's sanctuary was not just about plants or trees, it was about hope. Every seed he planted carried a story, a promise that life could continue and thrive even when the odds seemed impossible. He kept meticulous records of each seed, noting the date it was planted, the type of soil, and the weather conditions. This was more than organization, it was a conversation with the future. He imagined the day when each tiny sprout would grow into something magnificent, something that could remind anyone who saw it that patience and dedication were never wasted. But the work was not easy. At 70, Henry's body often protested. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of labor, his back ached from bending over the soil for hours, and his knees sometimes buckled under his weight. Yet he never let this stop him. Each day he reminded himself, if I stop even for a moment, the seed might not grow. This mantra pushed him forward through heat, cold, rain, and wind. He had learned to work with the rhythm of nature rather than against it, taking advantage of every moment of favorable weather to tend to his plants, repair fences, and prepare the land for new growth. One of Henry's most cherished parts of the ranch was the greenhouse he had built himself. It was small but sturdy, a shelter for fragile seedlings that could not survive the harsh outdoor conditions. Each morning, he would enter the greenhouse carefully, checking each plant for signs of growth, illness, or stress. He spoke to them quietly, offering words of encouragement as he watered the soil. "Grow strong," he would whisper, "spread wider, take root, and flourish." These words were both a prayer and a command, a reflection of his unwavering determination. Henry's vision extended beyond the greenhouse and the main fields. He dreamed of planting groves of trees that would provide shade for travelers, creating gardens that could feed the local community, and cultivating wildflowers that would attract bees and birds. He imagined a landscape that was alive with color, sound, and movement, a place that could inspire everyone who saw it. To make this happen, he had to overcome obstacles that most people never considered. Some areas of the ranch were rocky and dry, resistant to water and nutrients. Henry experimented tirelessly, adjusting the soil, finding ways to conserve water, and testing different methods until he found what worked. Each failure was a lesson, not a defeat, and he documented every step meticulously. Despite the challenges, there were moments of magic that kept Henry's spirit alive. One afternoon, after weeks of hard work, he noticed the first green shoots emerging from a patch of soil that had previously refused to grow anything. He knelt down, brushing the dirt away gently with his hands, and whispered to the tiny plants, "Finally, you've arrived. Spread wider, grow strong." A sense of quiet triumph filled him, not because he had succeeded alone, but because life had responded to his care and persistence. These small victories were precious, and Henry celebrated them with the same joy as a child discovering a hidden treasure. Henry's commitment did not go unnoticed. Some neighbors had begun to watch him from a distance, curious about the old man who refused to stop working despite his age. They saw the transformation of the ranch over time, the way barren fields slowly came to life, and the care with which Henry nurtured each plant. A few even offered to help, though Henry was selective. He welcomed assistance only from those who shared his vision and respect for the land. He did not need recognition, he needed understanding. Those who joined him often left inspired, carrying with them lessons of patience, dedication, and quiet determination. Evenings were a time of reflection for Henry. After a long day in the sun, he would sit on the porch with a warm cup of tea, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange as the sun sank below the horizon. He would think about the seeds planted that day, the progress made, and the work still to be done. The wind would rustle the trees gently, and he often imagined it carrying messages of encouragement from the land itself. Sometimes he would close his eyes and listen, feeling a deep connection with the world around him. This was his reward, the sense that he was part of something larger than himself, a living, breathing ecosystem that responded to care and patience. Henry's solitude was not lonely in the conventional sense. He had learned to enjoy his own company, to find satisfaction in small details and quiet achievements. Yet, he occasionally felt the pang of loneliness, a reminder that human connection was also important. On such nights, he would write in his journal, recording his thoughts, dreams, and observations. He would imagine a future where his work could inspire others, where his efforts could continue even after he was gone. Each entry was a promise to himself, a way to ensure that his vision for the ranch would endure. The story of Henry's dedication spread slowly through the small town nearby. People spoke of the old man who worked tirelessly, planting seeds and nurturing life long after most would have retired. Some were skeptical, dismissing it as obsession. Others were intrigued, wondering what kind of man could carry such determination. But Henry did not seek approval or fame. His satisfaction came from the tangible results of his labor, the visible proof that care, persistence, and love for the land could produce life even in the harshest conditions. As weeks turned into months, Henry's ranch began to transform in ways he had dreamed of. The once barren fields started showing signs of growth, The greenhouse flourished with healthy seedlings, and birds and insects returned to the land. Henry moved among the rows of plants with pride, adjusting, pruning, and nurturing them as if they were extensions of himself. Each plant that survived, each tree that grew taller, was a confirmation that his efforts were not in vain. Henry often reflected on the wisdom of his father and grandfather, who had taught him to respect the land and care for it with patience and dedication. Their voices seemed to echo in the rustling leaves and the soft hum of the wind. He carried their lessons forward, adding his own experiences and insights to create a vision that was uniquely his. He did not merely work the land, he listened to it, learned from it, and collaborated with it. This was his philosophy, his way of life, and his method for ensuring that the seed he planted would indeed take root. Through all the labor, challenges, and quiet victories, Henry McAllister remained unwavering in his mission. He knew that the journey was long, that some days would be harder than others, and that success was never guaranteed. Yet, he faced each day with the same determination, the same quiet joy, and the same belief that life rewarded those who persevered. He continued to whisper to the seedlings, to care for the animals, and to walk the land with respect and purpose. Every action was a step toward fulfilling his dream, and every small victory was proof that he was on the right path. And so Henry's days passed in a rhythm of labor, reflection, and hope. He was growing more than plants. He was growing a legacy, one seed at a time. He had planted not just in soil, but in the hearts of anyone who witnessed his dedication, teaching them that it was never too late to dream, to nurture, and to leave something meaningful behind. Henry's sanctuary was beginning to take shape, and though the journey was far from over, he moved forward with the confidence of a man who knew that his seed would eventually spread wider and take root, just as he had promised. Henry McAllister had been tending his ranch for decades, but life had a way of testing even the most determined souls. The years of quiet work, the patience, and the endless care for every seed, every plant, and every animal had taught him resilience. Yet, nothing could fully prepare him for the challenges that were about to come. The summer had been unusually dry, and the earth, despite Henry's tireless efforts, was beginning to show signs of struggle. The soil cracked under the relentless sun, the grass turned brittle, and even the hardiest trees seemed to wilt. For the first time in many years, Henry felt a flicker of doubt creep into his heart. It was during one of these scorching afternoons that a violent storm suddenly approached. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon, heavy with rain, wind, and a promise of chaos. Henry had seen storms before, and he had always prepared as best he could, securing fences, covering vulnerable plants, and sheltering the animals. But this storm was different. It moved quickly and with force. The wind howled like a wild animal, tearing through the ranch and rattling the old wooden structures. Henry, though 70 years old, ran from one corner of the property to another, checking fences, adjusting tarps, and coaxing his animals into safer areas. As the first sheets of rain fell, Henry felt a sense of urgency unlike anything he had ever experienced. The greenhouse, which held his most delicate seedlings, shuddered under the pounding rain. He rushed to the door and held it shut with all his strength, sweat mixing with the rain on his face. He shouted words of encouragement to the young plants as if they could understand him. "Hold on, you will grow. You will take root." His voice was drowned by the storm, but his determination was louder than any roar of wind. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The barn doors had been torn open, a portion of the fencing had collapsed, and some of the newly planted crops were ruined. Henry stood in the middle of the mess, rain-soaked and exhausted, and for a brief moment, despair threatened to overtake him. The years of careful work seemed to have been undone in just a few hours. His heart ached as he looked over the damaged land, and he felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. But as he knelt in the mud, inspecting the surviving plants, he whispered the words that had carried him through every challenge in his life. "Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." The next morning, Henry's body felt every bit of the storm's toll. His muscles were stiff, his joints ached, and his hands were raw from hours of repair. But he rose with the sun as always, fueled by the knowledge that giving up was not an option. He began the painstaking process of assessing the damage, making plans, and salvaging what he could. Every broken fence post, every uprooted plant, and every bent branch became a challenge to overcome rather than a reason to quit. Henry understood that resilience was built through adversity, and the storm had given him an opportunity to prove his commitment to his vision once again. As he worked through the day, Henry's mind wandered to the lessons he had learned over his long life. He remembered his father telling him that the land required patience and understanding, that sometimes nature tested the strongest hearts to see if they would endure. He remembered his grandfather's words about planting seeds not just in soil but in hearts, that perseverance was contagious and could inspire others. These memories strengthened him, reminding him that he was not alone in spirit, even if he worked alone in practice. Despite the devastation, Henry found small victories that kept him moving forward. A young tree that had been partially uprooted had somehow survived, its roots holding firm against the wind. A few seedlings in the greenhouse had endured the storm, standing tall and reaching for the light. These tiny signs of resilience reminded Henry of the importance of persistence, of continuing to nurture life even when circumstances seemed impossible. He carefully tended to each survivor, adjusting soil, providing support, and whispering encouragement as he worked. The storm also brought a sense of urgency to Henry's vision. He realized that he could no longer rely solely on his strength to protect the ranch. He began thinking about long-term solutions, planting stronger trees to act as windbreaks, improving irrigation systems to withstand dry spells, and reinforcing the greenhouse against future storms. Each idea required careful planning and time, but Henry embraced the challenge. He knew that true growth required adaptation and foresight, not just labor and hope. As the days passed, Henry continued to rebuild and repair, working tirelessly from sunrise to sunset. The townsfolk watched with curiosity, some shaking their heads at his stubbornness, others admiring his dedication. Children passing by would peek through the fence, fascinated by the old man who seemed to speak to plants as if they were old friends. A few adults offered help, bringing tools, seeds, or supplies, and Henry welcomed them cautiously, appreciating their assistance but keeping his vision and methods at the center of the work. One afternoon, while working in the fields, Henry noticed a young boy standing at the edge of the property, watching him quietly. The boy, no older than 12, had come from the town with a curiosity about the old rancher. Henry called him over and began explaining the work, showing him the seedlings, the trees, and the steps he took to nurture the land. The boy's eyes widened with wonder as he listened, absorbing the lessons of patience, resilience, and respect for nature. Henry smiled quietly, realizing that part of his legacy was not just the plants, but the knowledge and inspiration he could pass on to younger generations. Despite the physical exhaustion, Henry felt a renewed sense of purpose. The storm had tested him, and while it had caused damage, it had also reminded him why he continued his work. Each challenge was an opportunity to strengthen his resolve, to adapt, and to grow. He spent the evenings planning carefully, sketching out new sections of the ranch, marking areas for planting, and noting improvements to infrastructure. Every decision was deliberate, guided by years of experience and the wisdom gained through hardship. Henry also began reflecting on the importance of community. While he cherished solitude, he recognized that sharing knowledge, inspiring others, and accepting help when needed were crucial for achieving lasting growth. He began writing notes and instructions for anyone who might visit the ranch, detailing how to care for the plants, how to protect the animals, and how to respect the land. These notes were not only practical but also philosophical, reflecting his belief that patience, dedication, and love for life could transform even the harshest environments. Even as the ranch slowly recovered from the storm, Henry knew that more challenges would come. Nature was unpredictable, and the path of growth was never easy. Yet he faced each day with the same quiet determination that had carried him through decades of labor. His mantra, repeated silently and often, became a lifeline. "Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." This phrase was more than words. It was a promise, a guiding principle, and a source of strength that reminded him of the value of persistence, care, and hope. One evening, after a long day of work, Henry sat on the porch, looking out over the fields he had repaired and nurtured. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because the work was complete, but because he had faced adversity and continued to move forward. The land, scarred but resilient, reflected his own determination. Each plant, tree, and animal was a testament to his efforts and a reminder that growth, no matter how difficult, was always possible. As night fell, Henry walked through the greenhouse, checking on the seedlings that had survived the storm. He knelt beside them, gently adjusting the soil and whispering encouragement. "Grow strong," he said softly, "spread wider and take root. You have a future, and so do I." The words were a prayer and a command, a reflection of the bond he had formed with the land. In those quiet moments, Henry felt a sense of connection, a reminder that his efforts were not in vain and that life, even in the harshest conditions, could endure and thrive. Through the storm and its aftermath, Henry McAllister learned important lessons about resilience, adaptation, and hope. The damage to his ranch had tested him in ways he had not anticipated, but it had also strengthened his resolve and reminded him of the importance of persistence. He understood that challenges were not obstacles to be avoided, but opportunities to grow stronger, to learn, and to inspire others. Each day, each effort, each seed planted was a step toward the realization of his dream, a dream that would continue to spread wider and take root no matter the hardships he faced. Henry's life, though filled with labor and solitude, was rich with purpose. The storm had been a reminder that the path to growth was never smooth, but it had also shown him the power of determination, patience, and love for life. As he looked out over his recovering ranch, he knew that the seed he had planted, both literally and metaphorically, was resilient, and that one day it would flourish in ways that even he could not yet imagine. And in that moment, Henry smiled, ready to face the next challenge with unwavering faith and the quiet joy of a man who truly understood the value of persistence. Henry McAllister had always believed that life required quiet persistence and patience, but even he was not immune to surprises. One bright morning, as the sun rose slowly over the horizon and painted the ranch in shades of gold, a young woman appeared at the edge of the property. Her name was Emily Carter, a university student studying sustainable farming. She had heard stories about the 70-year-old rancher who had dedicated his life to turning his land into a sanctuary, and she had come, curious and eager to learn. At first, Henry was cautious. Visitors were rare on the ranch, and most people did not understand his work or his vision. He had grown accustomed to solitude, and he worried that someone else might disturb the delicate balance he had maintained for decades. Yet there was something in Emily's eyes, a mix of curiosity, determination, and respect, that reminded him of himself when he had been younger. Slowly, he allowed her to step closer, observing her as she took in the sprawling fields, the greenhouse, and the animals that moved peacefully across the land. Emily was fascinated by every detail. She asked questions about the soil, the irrigation methods, and the seedlings in the greenhouse. Henry answered patiently, demonstrating techniques he had refined over years of trial and error. As she watched him work, Emily realized that the ranch was not just a piece of land. It was a living testament to dedication, resilience, and love for life. She was inspired, and Henry, quietly observing her interest and respect, felt a spark of hope. Perhaps his efforts would not end with him. Perhaps someone would carry his vision forward. Over the next few weeks, Emily returned regularly to help Henry with the ranch. Together, they repaired fences damaged by storms, reinforced the greenhouse, and tended to the young plants that had survived the harsh summer. Henry taught her how to read the land, understand the soil, and anticipate the weather. Emily absorbed every lesson eagerly, learning not just about farming, but about patience, persistence, and the quiet joy of nurturing life. She began to understand the rhythm of the ranch, the way the animals responded to care, the way the plants grew, and the subtle signs of change in the soil and air. Emily also brought new ideas to the ranch. She suggested planting additional crops that could thrive alongside the existing ones, introducing composting techniques to improve soil fertility, and creating small water channels to better distribute moisture. Henry listened carefully, appreciating her fresh perspective and willingness to learn. He realized that collaboration could strengthen his work, and that sometimes a new set of hands and eyes could see possibilities that he had overlooked. Slowly, he allowed himself to trust her, and together they began to transform the ranch more efficiently than ever before. Despite their growing partnership, Henry remained cautious about sharing his deepest thoughts and dreams. He had spent decades building a vision in solitude, and he knew that not everyone would understand it. Yet, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, he shared a piece of his story with Emily. He told her about the seed he had been nurturing for decades, the dream of creating a sanctuary that would outlast him, and the challenges he had faced along the way. Emily listened in awe, realizing the depth of Henry's commitment and the enormity of the task he had undertaken. This conversation marked a turning point. Henry began to open up more, sharing not only his techniques but also his philosophy. He explained that every plant, every tree, and every living creature on the ranch was connected, and that nurturing one was a way of nurturing all. Emily absorbed these lessons with a growing sense of responsibility, understanding that her role was not just to help with labor, but to honor the vision Henry had dedicated his life to. Together, they became a team, blending experience with curiosity, patience with energy, and tradition with innovation. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch began to flourish in ways that Henry had only dreamed of. The fields, once struggling under harsh conditions, began to show signs of life and growth. Young trees took root and stretched their branches toward the sun. Seedlings in the greenhouse thrived, strengthened by the careful attention of both Henry and Emily. Birds returned to the trees, insects buzzed over the flowering plants, and the air itself seemed richer, filled with the quiet energy of life. Henry watched these changes with quiet pride, realizing that his vision was beginning to take shape more fully than he had imagined. Emily's presence also brought a sense of companionship that Henry had long missed. He enjoyed her curiosity, her eagerness to learn, and the small moments of laughter they shared while working side by side. She reminded him that collaboration did not weaken his independence. Rather, it strengthened his efforts and allowed his dream to reach farther than he could on his own. The ranch, once a solitary project, was becoming a shared journey, a living example of how dedication, patience, and partnership could bring life to even the most challenging land. Henry and Emily faced challenges together as well. Unpredictable weather, stubborn soil, and the occasional animal injury tested their patience and skills. Yet, each challenge became an opportunity to learn, adapt, and strengthen their bond. Henry found himself mentoring Emily not just in farming techniques, but in resilience, problem-solving, and the quiet art of perseverance. In return, Emily brought energy, new ideas, and a sense of optimism that lifted Henry's spirits, reminding him that even in his 70s, he could continue to grow, teach, and inspire. One afternoon, after successfully transplanting a row of young trees, Henry paused and looked out over the fields. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, but also a renewed awareness of the work that still lay ahead. "Spread wider," he whispered quietly to the rows of young plants. "I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." Emily smiled, understanding the significance of the words, and together they continued their work with renewed energy. The land, once struggling and sparse, was beginning to hum with life, and every effort they made reinforced the idea that persistence, patience, and care could overcome even the harshest challenges. Henry also began to share small stories with Emily about the past, the storms that had tested him, the lonely nights spent planning, and the moments of triumph when a plant survived against the odds. Emily listened intently, absorbing not only the knowledge of farming but the wisdom of a life spent in quiet dedication. She began to see the ranch not just as a project, but as a living story, a testament to human determination and the beauty of nurturing life. As the months passed, the ranch became a place of quiet inspiration. Neighbors began to notice the transformation and would occasionally stop to admire the young trees, the thriving greenhouse, and the careful attention given to every detail. Some offered assistance, others merely watched from a distance, but Henry welcomed each opportunity to share his vision. Emily helped guide the visitors, teaching them techniques, sharing stories, and inspiring a new generation of caretakers who could appreciate the balance between effort and patience, labor and observation. Evenings remained Henry's time for reflection. After a long day of work, he would sit on the porch, sipping tea, and watch the sun set over the ranch. The fields, alive with growth, reflected the success of his vision. Emily would often join him, sharing her observations, asking questions, and discussing future plans. These quiet moments reinforced the connection between them and reminded Henry that his dream was no longer a solitary endeavor. The seed he had nurtured for decades was beginning to grow not only in the soil, but in the hearts of those around him. Through Emily's presence, Henry discovered a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his work was not just about planting seeds, but about inspiring others, passing on knowledge, and creating a legacy that could continue beyond his lifetime. The ranch had become more than a home. It was a living classroom, a sanctuary, and a symbol of hope. Every plant, every tree, every thriving patch of soil was proof that persistence, patience, and care could bring life to even the most challenging circumstances. By the end of the season, the ranch had changed dramatically. Areas that had once been barren were now filled with life, and the greenhouse was flourishing. Birds, insects, and small animals returned to the land, drawn by the growing sanctuary. Henry looked out over the fields with quiet pride, understanding that his vision was finally taking shape. He turned to Emily and smiled, knowing that together, they had not only restored the ranch, but strengthened the dream that had carried him through decades of labor. Henry McAllister's life had always been about dedication, perseverance, and quiet determination. With Emily's help, he realized that these qualities could inspire others, teach important lessons, and create lasting change. The ranch, once a symbol of solitary effort, had become a shared journey, a testament to the power of collaboration, vision, and unwavering commitment. And as the sun set over the thriving fields, Henry whispered once again to the young plants, the trees, and the life around him, "Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." In that moment, Henry understood that his work, his vision, and his dream were no longer his alone. They had become part of a larger story, one that would continue to grow, inspire, and flourish for years to come. And he knew, deep in his heart, that with persistence, patience, and the willingness to share his knowledge, the seed he had planted would indeed take root and spread wider than he had ever imagined. Henry McAllister's ranch had begun to transform in ways he had once only dreamed of. The barren fields, dry and cracked from years of neglect, now pulsed with life. Rows of young trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. The greenhouse, once fragile and tentative, now held dozens of thriving plants, each carefully tended by Henry and Emily. Birds sang from the branches, insects buzzed over the flowers, and the ranch itself seemed to breathe, alive with the energy of growth. For Henry, these changes were more than a reward for his labor. They were proof that his vision, his perseverance, and his unwavering commitment to life were beginning to take root. The townspeople began to notice. Children would stop by, curious to see the rows of trees, the colorful flowers, and the thriving animals. Some adults, initially skeptical of Henry's lifelong project, came to admire the transformation. They marveled at how a 70-year-old man, working quietly and diligently, could restore land that had seemed impossible to heal. News of the ranch's revival began to spread, and soon local newspapers and community newsletters shared stories of the old rancher and the sanctuary he had created. Henry remained humble, however, uninterested in fame or recognition. He cared only that his work continued, and that life, nurtured with care, flourished on the land he loved. Emily's presence continued to make a profound difference. Her curiosity, energy, and eagerness to learn helped Henry see his work in new ways. Together, they experimented with new planting techniques, adjusted irrigation systems, and introduced small innovations that improved the ranch's productivity without compromising its natural balance. Henry appreciated her input, recognizing that collaboration could enhance his vision rather than diminish it. Emily, in turn, admired Henry's wisdom, patience, and deep connection to the land. She had learned more from him than she could have imagined, not only about farming but about perseverance, respect for nature, and the quiet power of dedication. One day, Henry and Emily worked together to plant a small orchard along the far edge of the property. The soil was dry and stubborn, but Henry refused to give up. He carefully prepared the ground, adding compost, adjusting irrigation, and planting each tree with meticulous care. Emily followed his instructions, learning to sense the land's subtle needs and respond to them. As they worked side by side, Henry shared stories of the storms, droughts, and long years of labor that had shaped him and the ranch. Emily listened intently, absorbing not only the techniques but the philosophy behind them. That growth required patience, attention, and unwavering commitment, even in the face of adversity. As the orchard took root, Henry felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Each tree was a symbol of resilience and hope, a tangible representation of the years he had devoted to nurturing life. The ranch, once a quiet and lonely place, had become a sanctuary not only for plants and animals, but for anyone who visited. People came to see the thriving fields, the greenhouse filled with seedlings, and the young trees stretching toward the sky. They left inspired, carrying with them a renewed understanding of patience, dedication, and the quiet rewards of hard work. Henry did not seek applause, but he found satisfaction in knowing that his efforts had touched others, showing them what was possible when one refuses to give up. Henry's work also drew attention from local organizations focused on conservation and sustainable agriculture. Representatives visited the ranch, curious to learn from Henry's methods and inspired by the transformation he had achieved. They observed the careful irrigation systems, the thriving plants, and the healthy animals that moved freely across the land. They asked questions, took notes, and sometimes offered assistance or advice. Henry welcomed their input, appreciating the opportunity to share knowledge and ensure that the lessons he had learned could benefit others. Emily, too, engaged with the visitors, demonstrating the techniques she had learned and sharing the insights Henry had passed on. Despite the recognition, Henry remained humble and focused. He knew that the true measure of success was not in the praise of others, but in the health and growth of the land itself. Each day, he continued to rise before sunrise, tending to the plants, animals, and soil with the same care and attention that had guided him for decades. Emily worked alongside him, and together they nurtured the ranch with patience, dedication, and a shared commitment to life. The once barren fields now flourished with crops, flowers, and young trees, each a testament to the power of perseverance and care. The transformation of the ranch also had a profound impact on Henry personally. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and energy, a reminder that life, even in his 70s, was filled with opportunities for growth and accomplishment. The land, resilient and thriving, reflected his own determination and commitment. Every tree, every plant, and every thriving seedling was proof that persistence and dedication could overcome years of neglect and hardship. Henry often paused during his work to take in the beauty around him, feeling a quiet pride and satisfaction that words could scarcely capture. As the seasons changed, the ranch continued to grow and evolve. Spring brought blossoms that filled the air with color and fragrance, attracting bees, butterflies, and birds. Summer brought warmth and sunshine, encouraging rapid growth and strengthening young plants. Fall painted the trees in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold, and winter provided a quiet time of reflection and planning for the months ahead. Through it all, Henry and Emily worked tirelessly, nurturing the land and ensuring that the sanctuary they had built continued to thrive. Henry also found joy in mentoring others who visited the ranch. Children from the nearby town came for educational tour, learning about planting, irrigation, and caring for animals. Adults seeking knowledge about sustainable farming observed Henry and Emily at work, asking questions and taking notes. Each visitor left with a piece of Henry's wisdom, inspired to apply the lessons of patience, dedication, and care in their own lives. Henry realized that his legacy was not only in the thriving plants and animals, but in the knowledge, inspiration, and hope he could pass on to others. The years of labor, patience, and dedication were finally coming together in a way that Henry had long envisioned. The ranch, once a quiet and struggling property, had become a thriving sanctuary, a living testament to resilience, care, and determination. The work was far from finished, but the progress was undeniable. Henry took satisfaction not only in the visible results, but in the knowledge that his vision had taken root, spreading wider than he had ever imagined. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch and painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Henry stood on the porch, looking out over the fields he had nurtured for decades. The wind rustled through the young trees, and the sound of birds singing filled the air. He turned to Emily, who was tidying the greenhouse, and smiled quietly. "Spread wider," he said softly. "I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." Emily nodded, understanding the significance of his words, and together they continued their work, knowing that every effort, every act of care was a step toward fulfilling a lifelong dream. Henry's story began to inspire others beyond the local town. Letters arrived from people who had read about his work, sharing their own experiences of perseverance and dedication. Some sought advice on starting their own gardens or farms, while others simply offered words of encouragement and admiration. Henry responded to each letter carefully, sharing insights, offering guidance, and expressing gratitude. He realized that his work had taken on a life of its own, reaching people far beyond the boundaries of his ranch, inspiring hope, determination, and action. Through it all, Henry remained focused on the most important task, nurturing life. The ranch had become more than a home or a farm. It was a symbol of persistence, hope, and the quiet power of care. Every plant, every tree, and every thriving animal was a reminder that hard work, patience, and dedication could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Henry had spent a lifetime cultivating not only the land, but also a vision that would continue to grow, inspire, and flourish long after his work was done. By the end of the season, the ranch had reached a milestone. Areas that had once been barren and lifeless were now thriving with plants, trees, and flowers. The greenhouse overflowed with seedlings, ready to be planted in the fields. Birds nested in the trees, and small animals returned to the land, drawn by the vibrant and nurturing environment. Henry walked through the ranch with quiet pride, reflecting on the years of labor, the challenges overcome, and the progress achieved. He realized that his vision, once fragile and uncertain, had taken root, spreading wider than he had ever imagined. Henry McAllister's life had always been about dedication, persistence, and quiet determination. Through decades of labor, he had nurtured not only the land but also hope, inspiration, and resilience. With Emily's help, he had transformed the ranch into a sanctuary, a living testament to the power of patience, care, and unwavering commitment. And as the sun set over the thriving fields, Henry whispered once more to the young plants, the trees, and the life around him. "Spread wider, I'm not stopping until my seed takes root." In that moment, Henry knew that his work had created something larger than himself. The ranch had become a place of inspiration, a symbol of resilience, and a living reminder that persistence and dedication could overcome the harshest challenges. His seed had indeed taken root, spreading wider than he had ever imagined, and the sanctuary he had nurtured would continue to grow, inspire, and flourish for generations to come.